Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to a new edition of the BuckeyeXtra Football Podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Rob Oller. It's transfer portal season, certainly around Ohio State football. The portal opened for the winter window for 2 weeks, January 2nd. The portal is open until January 16th, which gives Ohio State players 2 weeks to enter the portal, and also a chance to see who else goes into the portal and add to the roster. At the time of this recording on January 8th, there have been just over 20 players from the Buckeyes who have put their names in the portal and are planning to play college football elsewhere. The Buckeyes have added 5 players in the portal. When this season sort of dies down, we'll dive more into the portal and maybe where Ohio State was hurt the most and helped the most. But for now, our last episode took a look at the Buckeyes' loss to Miami in the college football playoff quarterfinals, and we wanted to sort of reflect on the 2025 season as a whole and kind of take maybe a macro view at it and sort of size up whether the Buckeyes had a successful season or ultimately whether it was a failure or perhaps maybe somewhere in between on that, Rob.
Yeah, I would like to ask the question, what is success for Buckeye Nation? I think it's changed through the years, through the decades. National championship was always the goal, but in the middle of the season, you weren't really thinking national championship. You were thinking win the game, beat Michigan. I'm talking, 30 years ago or more. And if you made it to the Rose Bowl, yeah, then you wanted to win it. It was disappointing if you didn't. You let a national championship slip through your fingers or whatever, even with the BCS, like even in 07. It was starting to change by then, of course. But today it's almost like, well, we should win the national title every year. And I think the beating Michigan, I ultimately would say it was a successful season. Was it what everyone wanted? No, but you lost to Indiana, you lost to Miami, two pretty good teams, really good defenses. Yeah, you showed some chinks in the armor. You got exposed a little bit and we'll get into that, the offensive line mostly, a little bit the defensive line, or at least the defense. But you beat Michigan. And so it wasn't a complete failure. Let's call it a mini successful season.
I I think the word I might use is productive.
Yeah, it's great. Good word.
Because coming into the season, you lost both coordinators. You had a new starting quarterback, and expectations were certainly high. I mean, this was a team that was top 5 preseason team. So you can't say that there was no national championship window. There was always a national championship window at Ohio State, but you had so many new pieces to the puzzle, and you weren't starting from scratch, but you were new defensive system with Matt Patricia coming in, a new starting quarterback in Julian Sayin, and you found a starting quarterback, which is no guarantee in any season. And now you have a guy who finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy voting in Sayin, who comes back as a second-year starter for next season. This will be the first time Ryan Day has had a starter in consecutive seasons since C.J. Stroud. So you found a pretty big building block in Sayin, who comes back next year. So I think from that standpoint, it sort of moved you along and set the stage for what could be a big 2026 season.
Yeah, Sayin was, I think, better than people thought he would be. I think he showed his freshman traits against the best teams, specifically Indiana and Miami. He held the ball a little longer, looked a little less sure, partly because he was under constant pressure, or a lot of pressure at least, and maybe failed to see some guys that were open. I think if you go on social media, you can't trust social media on these things because you get a lot of armchair quarterbacks saying, Cornell Tate was open down the middle. Well, yeah, he was open while Sayin was running as hard as he could to the left. And, like Peyton Manning couldn't make that throw. So think you have to be careful when you see situations where guys are open. If you're just in the pocket, not moving around, and you miss a guy, that's one thing. Anyhow, the point being that, yeah, Sam wasn't quite as sharp maybe against the best teams. And I just wrote a piece where I think he needs to run the ball more, whether that's a coaching thing or just him. CJ Stroud didn't run the ball either very much until the Georgia game when when suddenly he showed something, he flashed. But they didn't win the national title. They have not won a national title with a strictly pocket passer. Dwayne Haskins, although Haskins ran a little bit. I think I remember that Maryland game Haskins ran. Anyhow, yeah, to your point, I think they found some things. They found something with saying, they found something with their running back, Bo Jackson. Offensively, they found some stuff. And I think if Matt Patricia returns, which I guess we would expect him to at this point, although never say never. They can build on, what he put into play also.
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly no drop off on defense. In some ways, he enhanced their system with the way he could deploy linebackers close to the line of scrimmage, the way they use multiple different fronts. It moved Ohio State into a different era of football on that side where you're not just using four down linemen all of the time. And I think that was important for them to discover a little bit. I think with saying too, you have a quarterback I think you could win a national championship with. And there were certainly some issues that popped up in big games and his comfort level with pressure and being able to manage things under duress and whether he could sort of contend with that. I think it's probably important to note that for better or for worse, he didn't have much practice doing that in the regular season. They didn't confront a pass rush like Miami or Indiana until the postseason. 6 sacks all regular season, 5 in each of the two postseason games. But you saw the arm talent and the way he could just fit some passes downfield and the big play ability. The problem is they didn't capitalize on the big play ability in some of the big games. But there's enough of I think, a foundational element to his game that you think they can build off him, which wasn't the case after the 23 season with Kyle McCord, where they ultimately let him go to Syracuse and brought in Will Howard.
Yeah, I mean, we all know the elephant in the room was not even the elephant in the room. It was more obvious than that, was the offensive line just didn't get the job done against Indiana and Miami, allowing 5 sacks in each of those games. Now, some of that's on saying holding the ball too long, but those guys return. Most of those guys return, and so conventional wisdom would be, well, the offensive line will be better next year. The other way to look at it is, well, it's the same guys. So yeah, they need to improve. If they don't improve, or their talent just isn't enough to allow them to do what needs to be done, and maybe the word, nasty comes to mind. Are they nasty enough? Then you got the same issue, and it may not show itself until it's too late. Although next year's schedule is more challenging and more difficult. You have Indiana, you have Oregon, among others.
Not to mention Iowa as well.
Right.
And
And I think you go to USC too,
yeah,
which it's tough going West Coast regardless. And then you've got SC, which who knows what shape they'll be in. But the offensive line just needs to get the job done, which is weird because they got the job done against Michigan.
they did. Because Sayin just had all the time in the world back there. They had that long drive to ice the game. That was the least Sayin had been pressured all regular season against an FBS team in the game. So you felt going into the playoff and even the Big Ten championship game that the line had done enough where maybe it wasn't a strength of the team. It wasn't going to just be completely overwhelmed in a situation against Miami. And also, I think because of the previous year in 24, that was a big question mark, that position group, the whole season. And they were able to tinker with things and sort of patch some holes up and deal with some injuries. And it was okay for the playoff. And I think that being in recent memory maybe influenced the way you sort of projected this group out. I think ultimately, when I look back on this season, I think if you were to have told people in August that they would go 12-0 but not go on a playoff run, 12-0 beat Michigan but not win a national championship, I think most would they have taken that deal in the
I
summer.
think I think so. I mean, the lunatic fringe maybe wouldn't have, but I think most people would say, okay, we lost a lot. We had a essentially a freshman first time starter, uh, you know, who looked really good. Maybe not against the best teams, but that should change with experience. I think they'd take that. I mean, that's why I'm saying it was a mostly successful season. I think Miami's, sometimes it's about matchups. It's like the NCAA tournament in basketball. It's matchups. And the matchup in this case was Miami's D line. I mean, they got two NFL guys, much like Ohio State last year with Sawyer and JT Tuimola. Um, they had two defensive ends who went to the NFL, and Miami's going to have the same thing. And they exerted their will, and Ohio State had no answer for it.
It seemed like last summer the prevailing thought among the fan base, and feel free to email or tweet or whatever, but if I'm wrong, but it felt like everybody's sort of the thought was just beat Michigan this year.
Yeah, I agree.
And I do think that rivalry win carried a lot of significance, but I've wondered about this in the aftermath. Since Michigan ultimately fired Sharon Moore, and there have been a lot of stories that have come out about the dysfunction of Michigan, if some of the shine of that win has come off in a way, because it felt like a Michigan team that was not operating anywhere close to its full potential, and had a coach who had a lot of other issues, and how well prepared were they for Ohio State, and maybe Ohio State got off easy in that rivalry win, and that wasn't the Michigan we thought it was.
No,
Played the game.
I think it comes down to where do you stand on Ryan Day. I think that's really where it is now. I think the real laser focus for the critics of Ohio State are not so much Ohio State, the players, but it's Ryan Day. And you just mentioned maybe some of the shine is off that Michigan will win. Well, I think it's because those who were down on Ryan Day grudgingly gave him the respect he deserves, after the playoff run last year. And then after beating Michigan, it was the same. Okay, he finally beat Michigan. But now, where there's this dysfunction with Michigan, they can kind of say, oh, yeah, but of course they beat Michigan. Michigan was a train wreck. And then you jump into the Indiana game, and it started back up. Poor play calling, conservative, one prepared. The Brian Hartline issue raised its head there. Now that's not a Ryan Day issue, but it still sticks to him because
Yeah,
of
he
play
got them.
calling. Yeah, exactly. And then you get into Miami and they weren't prepared, and how could you not? So it really comes back. This all kind of always comes back to Ryan Day. And I know people, relatively sane people who I think are relatively sane, friends of mine who were not Ryan Day fans. For whatever reason, they still call him crying Ryan Day. They think he's overmatched. And I don't think that, but the problem is when you have things happen like Indiana and Miami, it just comes back to the surface. So I don't think Ryan Day has uh, exercised the critical demons yet completely, and never will. I mean, it's Ohio State, but in terms of this season, I mean, you're 12-0, you beat Michigan, success.
I wonder too how much them winning early against Texas, having that win as a feather in their cap, and then just totally rolling through the regular season, the effect that had on what the expectations for this season were coming in. Because ultimately, I think for a majority of the fan base, it's a disappointment because of how great they looked for all of the fall. Only the sixth time they've had a perfect regular, only sixth time in school history they've gone 12-0, and just to bulldoze their way through the season, to have a defense that, in terms of points allowed per game, was the best in the playoff era during the regular season, fewest points allowed by defense in the regular season since Alabama in 2011. And you look at how stacked they were on that side of the ball. You could have Caleb Downs first round pick, Marvell Reese first round pick, Sonny Styles first round pick, Caleb McDowell first round pick. So you have four guys on your defense, which could be the top half of the first round of the NFL draft, and you all of a sudden, I think, start to change your expectations of what the ceiling of the team could be. And ultimately, it turned out to be maybe more of a mirage. But if they had some early season stumbles, they start 10-2, maybe people have a different sort of feeling about the team. Where if Sain takes his lumps against Texas and then recovers down the line, you feel maybe a little differently, rather than you come out, you're running as a track guy where Rob, maybe you come out firing out of the gates, and then you kind of, on the last turn,
The bear jumps on you.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's accurate. I think there's one thing that needs to be said is that expectations are allowed to change. It's not like you're switching teams. I no longer follow the Browns. I'm no longer a Browns fan because they're terrible, so I'm going to follow the Cowboys. That's not what this is. This is expectations going in, as you articulated. You had a new quarterback. I wouldn't say expectations were low entering the season, but they definitely increased after Texas as when and things went along. So I think it's okay to have those expectations increase the way they did. Yeah, and so by the time you get there, I was writing, we were saying, is this the best Ohio State team ever? Because the defense was legit, and I still say the defense was legit. I mean, they gave up 17 points to Miami. There were some miscues there late, but the offense stumbled. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, with the talent they have with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, now you got this freshman quarterback, but man, his accuracy was like number 1 or 2 in the nation. I think these guys, this was like a dynasty team. And then when you look at last year and then you come back, I think what you're talking about is a missed or lost opportunity. That's what's going to stick in the craw of Ohio State fans. This was the window. This was the season. It all lined up, and they let it slip through their fingers. I think that's ultimately what hurts about this season is the expectations grew, and it was there for the taking. And now, if you want to step back and say, oh my gosh, I mean, I thought Georgia would be a problem, and Georgia's not even in it. Like, it would be Ohio State, Ole Miss. And I think Ohio State fans would be licking their chops over that, regardless of Ole Miss being this fun Cinderella story. I think Ohio State would feel pretty good going to the desert playing Ole Miss.
Coachless.
Yeah, exactly. So I think missed opportunity is the way I would frame this season.
And I think you also think about this too. Caleb Downs declared for the draft earlier this week. Probably the best safety in school history, maybe certainly the most decorated school safety in school history.
Yeah, Jack Tatum was pretty good.
Yeah, Mike Doss as well.
Yeah,
But he's in the conversation for best
absolutely,
school
absolutely.
history. And such a unique chess piece in the way they could move him up. They could have him play on the line of scrimmage as somebody who could rush the passer, play in the box, play deep in coverage. Just such a incredibly valuable player. And I think this window where they have him and Jeremiah Smith is a unique time. And next season will, I think, safely say, be Jeremiah Smith's last season at Ohio State. He'll be eligible to enter the 27 NFL draft. But if they only come out of this era with one national championship with those two guys in the roster, I think it'll have a little bit of a letdown feel.
Yeah, again, yeah, missed opportunity. And not just Caleb Downs, but I mean, a defense, like you said, Sonny Styles. I mean, you got what, three first round defensive players going?
I mean, arguably four, depending on what happens with Caden McDonald. He has not made a draft decision as of lunchtime, January 8th, a Thursday. And defensive tackles are never guaranteed to be first round picks either. But I mean, it feels like they could have four guys from the defense go in the first round of the draft.
Yeah, and that's a lot to replace. I know it's Ohio State, and they don't rebuild, they just reload, as they like to say. But that's losing a lot. And so you would think your defense, just from a pure talent standpoint in 2026, would on paper not be quite as strong. Now, transfer portal, who knows how that'll play out, but I don't think you're bringing in any Caleb Downs or even necessarily Sonny Styles on that.
No, and the thing that made Caleb's transfer so unique was players of that caliber are not always available in the transfer market, and the reason he was in the portal was because of the best coach in college football of this era retired.
Right.
Sort of a fluke in the system a little bit because those retirements don't happen all the time. If Downs is born 3 years earlier, he doesn't leave Alabama. He plays his full career there under Nick Saban. So
Well, don't forget, the quarterback probably doesn't come here either.
yeah, right.
Right.
Exactly.
Julian Sayin was an Alabama guy, and so the best thing that happened for Ohio State was Nick Saban retiring.
Yeah, I mean that's the big reason why a lot of I think you see the best players become available in the transfer markets when coaches retire or they're fired because typically guys are leaving other blue bloods because they're not playing.
Right. And they're leaving because they're not playing because they weren't good enough to beat out the guy who is playing.
Right.
Now it's case by case, but generally they're leaving for two reasons. They want playing time or they want money. Probably both. But definitely playing time. I mean, in Ohio State situation, it might be a little more money oriented because you had guys, again, we don't need to get into the transfer portal, but you got some pretty good five-star receivers that have left who you would have thought would have been in line to get a lot of playing time, but they might have just gotten poached by the paycheck.
Yeah. It's but I think to what I was saying, I guess it's hard to find those players.
It is. What's your take on switching just a little bit to what needs to happen in 2026? What do you foresee? Look into your crystal ball. What needs, or just practically, what needs to change? What needs to improve for Ohio State to, I guess, advance deeper into the playoff? Not knowing really what else is out there right now, and you can't with the portal. Like what teams are going to be dominant? Indiana loses Mendoza. Um, Miami loses Carson Beck, right?
Yeah, although it's more probably their pass rush, Ruben Bain, Keontae
Well,
Scott.
right. I'm saying, what needs to happen for Ohio State to go deeper? What needs to improve? I would say kicking game, special teams, kicking game, obviously. Jaden Fielding just, he just didn't come through the way he needed to. I'm not going to get personal about it, but he didn't make the kicks that needed to be made to put them in a game or put them over the hump. The special teams in general, I thought the punting was okay, pretty good, but they never broke it. Never broke a big one. It was and I would say the offensive line needs to just take it up a notch. Those would be the two things. Not getting into what missing pieces there'll be on defense. we can argue that and talk about that forever. You just don't know. But what we do know is the O-line needs to be better, and I think special teams need to be better. But is that enough? And I would say Sayan needs to run. I know that's a low-hanging fruit. It can be, but, and I don't mean he needs to run like become some incredible run first guy, but when the opportunity is there, when they need 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6, he needs to be able to get that in the big games if he needs to, if the pressure's there. He just needs to be a threat. He needs to become more of a threat as a runner, I would say. I would say those three things. Quarterback, run a little bit, offensive line, which kind of go hand in hand, and then special teams. Those three areas need to improve.
And I think they can address some of the offensive line, not even necessarily by adding through the portal. I think they can move some guys around. You can move Austin Searville inside to right guard to replace Tegra Shabola, who was one guy who entered the transfer portal, and I think was going to have to fight for that job anyway, even if he had returned. And you could play somebody like Ian Moore at left tackle, who I thought showed some promise when he started against Purdue, and then I think probably more notably in the second half against Miami when Searville did go out. So you could reconfigure some pieces on the line without having to go into the portal and trying to spend big on a tackle, which is not always easy to do. And not just the personnel of these position groups, kicker, offensive line, quarterback, but the other big question for Ryan Day this offseason is, do you find somebody who can call plays? He gave up play calling 2 years ago and handed things over to Chip Kelly that worked ultimately very well for them when they won the national championship. Did not have that same experience to lean on with Brian Hartline, and ultimately took back play calling for the playoff. They don't have anybody of Kelly's stature on the offensive staff right now. Do you need to go out and get somebody to be able to be your primary play caller, or can you hand it off to Keenan Bailey, who is the co-offensive coordinator, who's still on staff, or is there a world where Ryan Day takes back play calling? I don't sense that's a likely deal, because I think he wants to be in that CEO role long term. I think that's his vision for the program. But you do need somebody with the experience, I think, maybe to handle that a little bit.
Yeah. I was interested in what Urban Meyer said recently on his podcast, which he thinks the specifics of play calling. No, actually, he just said play calling's a little overrated, because the head coach still has veto power. Urban Meyer would say, no, I want to run it here. No, let's take a shot. I I see where he's coming from, but I don't totally agree, because I think the devil is in the details with play calling. And I think that the specific plays do matter, whether in terms of creativity. I mean, the head coach may sign off and veto stuff, but he's not. I don't think the head coach is jumping in there. No, I want this guy to run this route and this, it's more big picture. So I think it does matter. And I think it probably matters more than Urban likes to say or think. But I left that out of my three. I had special teams, O-line, and the running quarterback, and you added, rightfully so, I think offensive coordinator is going to be a big deal.
They're all things that Ohio State needs more from in 26 if they're to be successful. So you could I think probably harp on any one of those things. With the play calling, I do think there is some semantics to it, because the head coach always has veto power.
Right.
But you look at their offensive coaching staff, it does skew younger. And it's always felt like some of Ryan Day's best offenses have been when he's had an older guy with him. Started off with Kevin Wilson. You had Chip Kelly last year. I think it's just valuable to have more brain power in the building. And you have to, I think, I think it's valuable to have more voices in their staff meetings, their game plan meetings, fresh ideas, seasoned voices. I mean, you look at I know Urban made that point about the play calling, but the last time Ohio State was shut out in the first
Yeah.
half of a game was the playoff semifinals in 16. Urban went out to hire Kevin Wilson to be his offensive coordinator and some other guy named Ryan Day to be the quarterback's coach. So they went out and brought in a sort of an infusion of some new ideas to elevate the passing game. And it, it stands to reason that Ohio State would do well and be well serviced by going out and finding somebody to help elevate their, at the very least, their game plan.
And here's the deal, Joey, is that this is the blessing and the curse of Ohio State. We can talk all day about like the regular season, and it is more challenging next year. But really, when you get down to the nub of it, it's what do you need to do? What needs to happen against these really good teams in the playoff? I mean, Ohio State could have won some of these games this year with their backups. And it's hard to get a read on how good that's been a problem here for a few years now. How good is this team? Because they're just beating up on middling Big Ten opponents. And that happens around the country a lot of places, but it's just hard to get a read on it. So really when you start to do your Dr. Frankenstein, get down in there, like what really needs to happen here in keeping this thing alive, this body alive and bringing it to life is against the Miamis, against the Indianas, against the Georgias. And it's almost like an exhibition season up to the playoff. And I know that no one likes to hear that, but it felt that way after Texas and with Penn State being a mess and then, Michigan, okay, but it really just felt like, what do we have here? And you said it earlier. Did we get fooled? Did we get fooled this year by a team that had all these incredible pieces and players, Jeremiah Smith, Tate, and yet the collective, something maybe was missing. And I don't know if it was leadership, if it was just a nastiness. Maybe they just ran up against a Miami team and Miami defense that was better than they could handle. Sometimes you credit the other team, but still, like what's it going to look like next year? And I think having again a better schedule will probably help them because Ohio State's going to make the playoff. And we talked about this with two losses, they make the playoff.
The funny thing, I think, for Ohio State too, and this goes for a lot of teams in college football, but the incentives for winning in this 12 team format are just funky too, because Ohio State had a great regular season, went 12-0, a better regular season than Oregon had. But
Mhm.
would you rather have had Oregon's postseason path or Ohio State's? Oregon did not have to play Indiana in the Big Ten title game. Instead, they get a first round game against James Madison as a sort of a ramp up to Texas Tech and the Orange Bowl, and they get a little momentum and then win that game. And Ohio State, I think, has a tougher draw against Miami as a 2 seed with a long layoff. And they had a better regular season than Oregon, the 5th seed, or Ole Miss, the 6th seed. But which team would you rather played in which team would you rather have the draw? I think you would have picked Ole Miss or Oregon. So it's
Right.
weird because as a fan of Ohio State and for us as we sort of evaluate Ohio State, you go in week in and week out. It's important for Ohio State to win this game so they can get a higher seed in the playoff. It's important for them to beat this opponent because then they have a chance to clinch a spot in the Big Ten championship game. It feels like those things are have less meaning for the college ball playoff path. They have meaning for crossing those goals off your goal list throughout the season. If you want to win a Big Ten title, if you want to have a perfect regular season, but in terms of what is the ultimate prize, the national championship, it doesn't feel like those are very significant. It's kind of like just get the 10 wins, and then the postseason will be a crapshoot.
Yeah, it's a great point. Everything's changed and will continue to change. I don't think we have a large enough of a sample size to get into the whole thing of whether you have you receive the bye and you get an extra week of rest. It's the rest versus rust issue. It's only really been, well, it's been 2 years, but really only one because the way it played out last year with teams, the format changed and teams that were higher ranked maybe shouldn't have been. And then this year, Indiana won, was the only team, right? Indiana was the only team that won, but Oregon was favored actually in their game. So it's, I don't know. I think you make a great point though of just get those 10 wins and then kind of go from there. The last thing I'll say is I think Ryan Day, it'll be interesting if Ohio State revisits the whole um resting guys and the whole slowing down the offense to help guys later in the season be fresh for the playoff. Well, they only played one extra game after the Big Ten championship game, so you didn't really need to load manage maybe as much as you thought. And does that cost you in the long run? I don't know. I don't know the analytics on all that. I don't know if they exist, what they say, but I think that Ohio State slowing it down ultimately may have hurt them this season. And I know that Ryan Day at one point, maybe it was after Michigan, said, "Oh, we're gonna let it fly," and they really didn't. Now maybe they couldn't. Maybe their offensive line did not allow them to let it fly and go deep downfield as much as they thought they could. But
Yeah, because there's an argument that the slower pace, the heavy personnel was by design to try to mask some of the issues they had
mm,
on the line.
yeah, interesting.
But I do think them not being able to go tempo hurt them in the playoff because that was the time when they were down 14-0 in the second quarter. You need to create more opportunities for yourselves. And you're
Yeah,
playing a team that was also slow tempo. It's part of the reason why I think it was a bad matchup for Ohio State. And the teams that have gotten them their last two losses were teams that were just trying to play keep away from them. Michigan
yeah,
at the end of 24 and Miami this year. Miami wasn't playing keep away the same way Michigan was. Um, and Indiana was a little faster. But two out of the last three losses, I guess, were slower tempo teams. And so it feels like if you have no experience or practice going at a faster tempo, it's hard to all of a sudden crank up the speed when you need to.
yeah. And they seem to have done that in the playoff last year. That was the difference. They went from Michigan to Tennessee, pedal to the metal, and kind of kept it going. And I know that's a big complaint of the fan base is why didn't they just carbon copy what they did in the playoff last year and let it fly? Again, the offensive line came through in the clutch last year, and this year it didn't.
So one guy last year probably didn't get enough credit, and still probably doesn't get enough credit, was Donovan Jackson, who moved over to left tackle midseason was such a consistent presence for
Yeah, it's funny because the offensive line was maligned a lot last year,
yeah.
even outside of the injuries. And yet, when it came down to it, it got the job done. Fry, the O-line coach, he was maligned and more for his recruiting, maybe. And then they came through in the end, and then he went to Arizona Cardinals, and they brought in Bowen. That's something to keep an eye on, right, Joey? There's going to be a little more hot white spotlight on the offensive line coach going into 2026.
And it's funny, in a place like Ohio State, I think a lot of programs, the the fan base doesn't always know the position coaches
Right.
all that well. Um, Ohio State's fan base is so passionate and such that they do tend to know the position coaches, and it doesn't take all that long before they really get to know them and they really turn the heat up
Yeah.
on them.
Yeah. The best thing for a head coach is for the fan base to know the assistant coaches because the assistant coaches can be kind of human shields to protect at times the head coach. And the head coach can kind of say, well, the guy maybe didn't get the job done. They don't say that, but you know that's the case once suddenly assistant coaches are leaving the program after a struggling season. Head coach cast them aside. Anyhow, 2026 will be interesting. What we won't have, let's finish on this. What we won't have is the quarterback competition that we've had. Like you said, CJ Stroud was the last QB to, go. You knew he was going to be the head guy. You know Stan's going to be the head guy. And that brings up this last point that I don't think I ever again will be caught even thinking that there is a quarterback competition. I think, I mean, if it was as close as it was supposed to be this year with Lincoln Keenholz and Julian Sand, I'm not buying it. They knew Sand was what he was, and they knew Keenholz wasn't the guy, and yet they talked as if this was some close thing, and they wanted to keep the backup on the string so he wouldn't transfer, or that just keep him buoyant. He is only one play away, but we're not going to have any of that competition. We're not going to have to, 2 weeks before the start of the season. Is that when Ryan Day will name his starter? We know who the starter is. So that drama is gone. And for me, I'm not sure for you. You'll be doing this a lot longer, but I'm not sure I'm buying into ever again there is a real actual competition between these guys. I mean, was there even with McCord and who was it? McCord and Brown?
That was a real competition because they didn't.
Yeah, was it? Was it? I don't know. I mean, Brown transfers to Cal, and can't win there, and he's in the portal again. I just don't think I buy that the competition is as close as the head coach says. So it's like that's all.
And
But
you know
it's a
what?
moot point. It's a moot point for 2026. Look up
Don't have
moot.
to worry about it. But we'll get to see Lincoln Keenholz play next year. He transferred to Louisville and looks like he'll be the in line to be the starter there if he can win the job. And he'll have Jeff Brom as his coach, and he's had some
Yeah.
quarterbacks who have some good numbers. So a pretty quarterback friendly spot for.
Yeah, and good for him. If he doesn't win the job, well, that just proves my point even further that he really wasn't going to ever win the job at OSU.
Yeah. Third straight Ohio State quarterback who's transferred to an ACC school, so we won't ever see the sort of I guess the boomerang where they come back
Ah,
to face Ohio State.
yeah, they know better. They don't want to face that Matt Patricia or whoever it's going to be running the defense.
Yeah.
Does Patricia stay or go?
Probably depends what sort of NFL coordinator jobs materialize. That would be a good situation for him. I mean, I do wonder what transpired last offseason with Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly, what effect that might have, where it's sort of the grass is not always greener, although Chip Kelly did find his share of green in his bank account by going to Las Vegas.
Dan has landed now at Northwestern.
Right, but in terms of
Yeah,
for Penn State and the Vegas Raiders, and we're both out of jobs by the end of the year. So
right. I think Patricia's got his eye. I would just total guess. He's got his eye on the NFL. He's an NFL guy. He was worked with Belichick. All this stuff about how he loves the players of college, teaching guys. I don't dispute that. There's some truth to it, but I just think if the right NFL D coordinator job, I don't think he'd go back to the NFL for some, schlucky job as some assistant to the assistant. But D Cord, I think he would go back if it's the right situation.
yeah, and when I think with Chip Kelly, the situation with him is that it was definitely a good financial move to take that job because Las Vegas paid him quite a bit of money. But from a football perspective, that was a franchise that's been in a state of disarray for quite a bit. So it was a roll of the dice from an on-field perspective. So if you're somebody like Patricia, maybe you don't have to bolt at the first opportunity. And he's younger than Chip Kelly. He's just over 50, so he's got a little bit of a longer career ahead of him. So maybe there's
He
less.
can be selective, and I think he probably should be and will be. And if it doesn't open up, then he spends another year at Ohio State, which will have a good defense.
Yeah, I think it probably ultimately just depends on how the head coaching market in the NFL shakes out and who those guys want to hire as their coordinators.
Right.
Certainly, there'll be more to analyze in the weeks ahead because it's only the start of the offseason, and in this era of college football, it's the rosters turnover pretty significantly. So we'll have more in the coming weeks. That was Rob Oller. I'm Joey Kaufman, sort of talking out how we felt about the Ohio State football season. If you have thoughts you'd like to share, don't hesitate to be in contact with us. And thanks for enjoying and sticking with us throughout the 26 football season. We'll have more in the off season. We appreciate you all. Talk to you next time.